Ambassador Lisa Morgan walked through the long hallways of the Coalition Assembly Building. Her shoes clicked on the smooth metal floor as she carried the datapad with Earth's speech for this year. She had given this same speech 12 times before, and each time the other alien races listened politely. Some even clapped when she finished. Today felt different. The hallways seemed too quiet. Usually, other ambassadors would nod to her or say hello. Today, they looked away when she passed. The Zephyrian guards at each door watched her with their large yellow eyes, but said nothing. Lisa reached the great speaking chamber where all the important decisions were made. The massive doors were made of some blue metal that sparkled in the light. She had walked through these doors many times before. Today, 2 Kethtai guards stood in front of them. Their bug-like faces showed no emotion as they held up their forearms to stop her. Ambassador Morgan may not enter, one of them said in their clicking voice. Lisa stopped and stared at them. What do you mean? I have Earth's speech ready. We always speak on this day every year. The taller Kethai tilted its head. New rules. Humans no longer speak in this chamber. That's impossible, Lisa said. We are members of the coalition. We have rights. Not anymore, the guard clicked. Please leave this area. Lisa felt her heart beating faster. She pulled out her communication device and called the coalition offices. After waiting for several minutes, a voice answered. This is Secretary Volthan speaking. This is Ambassador Morgan from Earth. There seems to be some mistake. I can't enter the speaking chamber. There was a long pause. No mistake, Ambassador. The council voted last night. Humans will no longer speak in our meetings. Lisa gripped her device tighter. What are you talking about? Nobody told me about any vote. The decision is final. Humans have proven too dangerous to have a voice in galactic matters. You may stay as observers, but you cannot speak or vote anymore. The line went dead. Lisa stared at her device, unable to believe what she had just heard. She had been Earth's voice in this place for 8 years. Now they were telling her that voice was no longer welcome. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Jake Martinez sat in his command chair aboard the Earth Defense Force ship Liberty's Edge. His crew was watching the live broadcast from the Coalition Assembly. They always watched when Earth gave its yearly speech. Captain, said Amy Brooks from her station, something's wrong. Ambassador Morgan should be speaking by now. Jake looked at the main screen. Instead of showing Lisa at the speaking platform, the camera showed Chancellor Vexthera of the Zep. Her tall, thin form stood at the center of the chamber as she addressed the crowd of alien representatives. The Coalition Council has made an important decision, the Chancellor said in her cold voice. Humanity has shown itself to be too violent and unpredictable to participate in civilized discussion. From this day forward, humans will observe our meetings, but will not speak. A murmur went through the chamber. Some of the alien ambassadors seemed surprised. Others nodded in agreement. This is madness, whispered Rick Torres from the engineering station. They can't just silence us like that. Jake felt anger building in his chest. Amy tried to contact Ambassador Morgan. Amy worked at her controls for several minutes. I'm getting through, Captain. Lisa's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired and worried. Captain Martinez, I assume you saw what happened. We saw, Jake said. What are they planning to do with you? They're moving me to a small apartment in the diplomatic district. I can stay here, but I cannot enter the government buildings anymore. They say I'm lucky they don't send me back to Earth. This is wrong, Jake said. Earth has been part of the coalition for almost 200 years. We've helped them fight wars, shared our technology, traded with them fairly. Lisa nodded. I know, but Chancellor Vexthera convinced enough species to vote with her. She says, humans are too emotional and too quick to fight. She says we make the other species uncomfortable. On Earth, President Helen Carter sat in her office with her top advisors. The news from the Coalition Assembly had reached Earth an hour ago. Now she had to decide how to respond. "Madam President," said Admiral Pete Collins, "this is clearly the first step in something bigger. They don't just want to silence us. They want to control us." Defense Secretary Karen White agreed. "Intelligence reports show Zephyrian ships moving toward our outer colonies. The Kethtai are setting up new monitoring stations near our trade routes." President Carter stood and walked to the window. She could see the lights of the city below, millions of humans going about their lives. Most of them didn't know yet that their voice in the galaxy had just been taken away. "How long before they try to take more than just our voice?" she asked. "Not long," Admiral Collins said. "If we don't respond, they'll see it as weakness. Next they'll want our colonies, our ships, maybe even Earth itself." Karen White pulled up a holographic display, showing human settlements across the galaxy. "We have families on 47 different worlds, Madam President. If the Coalition decides we're dangerous, those people become hostages." President Carter turned back to her advisors. "What are our options?" "We can protest through diplomatic channels," Karen said. "File complaints, ask for meetings, try to negotiate. And if that doesn't work," Admiral Collins straightened in his chair, "then we remind them why they were afraid of us in the first place." The president looked at both of them. "Start preparing contingency plans. If they think they can silence humanity without consequences, they're about to learn how wrong they are." Back on the Liberty's edge, Captain Martinez ended his call with Ambassador Morgan. His crew watched him carefully, waiting for orders. "Captain, Amy Brooks said quietly, 'What do we do now?'" Jake stared at the screen showing the Coalition Assembly. Chancellor Vex Thera was still speaking, explaining why humanity was too dangerous for civilized society. Other alien leaders were nodding along, agreeing that humans needed to be controlled. "For now, we watch," Jake said. "But I have a feeling we won't be watching for very long." Rick Torres spoke up from his station. "Sir, I'm picking up coded transmissions from Admiral Collins on Earth. Looks like they're starting something called Operation Silent Thunder." Jake smiled grimly. "Silent Thunder. I like that name." He looked around at his crew. "They want to silence humanity's voice. Let's see how. They like it when Earth finds a new way to speak." The Coalition had made their first move. They thought they had won by taking away humanity's right to speak. But they had forgotten something important about humans. When peaceful words failed, humans had always found other ways to make themselves heard. 3 months had passed since the Coalition silenced humanity's voice. Ambassador Lisa Morgan sat in her small apartment on Nexus Prime, watching the news feeds from across the galaxy. What she saw made her sick to her stomach. The first human colony to fall was New Texas, a farming world where families had lived for generations. Lisa watched as Zephyrian ships landed in the fields where Bill Thompson had grown crops to feed 3 star systems. The aliens called it resource redistribution for galactic benefit. Bill stood in his cornfield, watching Zephyrian soldiers load his harvest onto their ships. His son, Danny, barely 18 years old, stepped forward. "You can't take our food," Danny said. "We worked all year to grow this." A Zephyrian officer looked down at the young man. "The Coalition Council has decided this food is needed elsewhere. Your family will receive a basic food allowance." Basic allowance. Bill stepped up beside his son. "This is our land. We grew this food." "Not anymore," the officer said coldly. "This world now serves the greater galactic community." When Danny tried to protest again, 2 Kethtai guards grabbed him with their forearms and dragged him toward their ship. His mother, Susan Hayes, ran after them screaming, but more guards held her back. "Where are you taking him?" she cried. "Detention. Center for Disturbing Galactic Harmony," the Zephyrian officer said. "He will be released when he learns proper respect." Similar scenes played out across dozens of human worlds. The aliens always used the same words: galactic harmony, resource, Redistribution? Proper supervision? But Lisa could see what was really happening. The Coalition was stealing everything humans had built. On his ship, Captain Jake Martinez received secret messages from human colonies throughout the galaxy. His engineer, Rick Torres, had built a new communication system that bounced signals through cosmic radiation. The aliens couldn't detect it, but it let humans share information. Captain, Amy Brooks said, as she read the latest reports, "It's getting worse. The Kethtai have taken control of the mining stations at Kepler 7. They're saying the human workers are inefficient and need alien supervision." Jake looked at the star charts on his screen. Red dots marked every place where Coalition forces had moved in. There were more red dots every day. "They're not just taking our resources, Rick," Torres said from his engineering station. "They're taking our people too. Anyone who complains gets arrested for disrupting order." Amy pulled up another message. This one's from the colony at New Boston. They say Zephyrian ships are scanning all human communications. Anyone caught sending messages to Earth gets sent to a detention facility. Jake felt anger burning in his chest. The Coalition wasn't content with silencing humanity's voice. Now they wanted to make sure humans couldn't even talk to each other. Back on Nexus Prime, Lisa was making plans of her own. Her aide, Tony Clark, brought her food every day. Tony was a young man from Earth who had worked in the diplomatic corps for 5 years. He was also secretly helping Lisa gather information. "Ambassador," Tony whispered as he set down her meal, "I've learned something important. The Coalition isn't doing this because they think we're violent." Lisa looked up from her datapad. "What do you mean?" "I heard Chancellor Vexthera talking to her advisors," Tony said quietly. "They're afraid of our ideas, not our weapons. Human concepts like individual freedom and democratic voting are spreading to other species. The Meraxians have started demanding representation in the Council. Some Neptunian colonies are refusing to follow orders they didn't vote for." Lisa felt a spark of hope. The Coalition fears that other species want what humans have always had. Tony nodded. The Chancellor said that human ideas about freedom are like a virus spreading through the galaxy. She said they had to stop it before more species rebel against the Council's authority. This changed everything. Lisa had thought the Coalition was punishing humanity for being too aggressive, but they were actually punishing humanity for being too free on Earth. President Helen Carter met with her military leaders in a secure bunker deep underground. Admiral Pete Collins spread out holographic displays showing Coalition ship movements across the galaxy. "They're being systematic," Admiral Collins said. "First, they silence us politically. Then they take our outer colonies. Now, they're demanding we surrender our entire fleet for inspection and modification." Defense Secretary Karen White pointed to a cluster of red dots near Earth's solar system. "Zephyrian Admiral Klexmore is approaching with a massive fleet." His message was clear: surrender our ships or face the consequences. President Carter studied the display. Earth's blue dot looked very small, surrounded by all those red enemy markers. "How long do we have?" she asked. "His fleet will reach Earth in 6 days," Admiral Collins said. "He expects us to meet him in space and hand over our weapons without a fight." Karen White activated another display. "The good news is that Operation Silent Thunder is ahead of schedule. Our hidden shipyards have produced more vessels than we originally planned." President Carter looked at the new display. It showed dozens of green dots scattered throughout the solar system. "How many ships?" "More than the Coalition knows about," Admiral Collins said with a grim smile. "We've been building in the shadows for months. New weapons, new armor, new tactics they've never seen before. Will it be enough?" Admiral Collins was quiet for a moment. "Madam President, we're about to find out if humanity can fight its way back to having a voice in this galaxy." Back on his ship, Captain Martinez received new orders from Earth. As he read them, his crew gathered around his command chair. "What are our orders, Captain?" Amy Brooks asked. Jake looked at his crew. These people had served with him for 3 years. They trusted him to lead them into whatever came next. Earth is done being silent, he said. Admiral Klexmore thinks we'll surrender our fleet without a fight. He's about to learn how wrong he is. Rick Torres grinned from his engineering station. Finally, I've been working on some new modifications to our weapons systems. The aliens have never seen anything like what we can do now. Amy Brooks checked her tactical displays. The whole fleet is moving into position. This is really happening, isn't it? Jake nodded. The coalition wanted to silence humanity's voice. Now they're going to hear us speak in the only language they understand. On New Texas, Bill Thompson worked in his fields under the watchful eyes of Zephyrian guards. His son Danny was still in detention, and his wife Susan was forced to work in the Alien Food Processing Center. But Bill wasn't broken. Every night, he used Rick Torres's secret communication system to send messages to other human colonies. "Hold on," he transmitted to farmers on other worlds. "Earth hasn't forgotten us. Help is coming." Dr. Susan Hayes treated sick colonists in a clinic that was now under alien control. The Zephyrians gave her just enough medical supplies to keep people alive, but not enough to keep them healthy and strong. She knew this was intentional. Weak people couldn't fight back, but Susan had hidden a secret communication device in her medical bag. Every night, she sent information about coalition movements to Captain Martinez and the human fleet. "They think they've won," she transmitted. "They think we'll just accept being their slaves. They don't understand humans at all." The coalition had made a terrible mistake. They thought that by silencing humanity's official voice, they could make humans disappear. Instead, they had created something much more dangerous, a humanity united in purpose, communicating in secret, and preparing for war. Chancellor Vexthera sat in her office on Nexus Prime, reviewing reports from human colonies. Everything was going according to plan. The humans were submitting to coalition authority. Their resources were being redistributed. Their troublesome ideas about freedom were being contained. She had no idea that in hidden shipyards throughout human space, weapons were being prepared that would shake the foundations of her empire. She didn't know that every human world was connected by secret communications. She couldn't imagine that the species she had silenced was about to roar loud enough to wake the entire galaxy. The coalition had taught humanity an important lesson. When words failed, actions spoke louder than any speech ever could. Admiral Klexmore of the Zephyrian fleet sat in his command chair, watching Earth grow larger on his screen. His massive armada consisted of 47 warships, enough firepower to destroy entire planets. He expected the humans to surrender without firing a single shot. "Admiral," his communication officer said, "we are receiving a message from Earth's president." "Put it on screen," Klexmore said. He expected to see a defeated human leader begging for mercy. Instead, President Helen Carter appeared on his screen, with a calm expression. Behind her stood Admiral Pete Collins and Defense Secretary Karen White. None of them looked afraid. "Admiral Klexmore," President Carter said, "I've received your demands. You want us to surrender our fleet and submit to coalition oversight." "That is correct," Klexmore replied. "Your species has proven unfit for governance. We will take control of your military forces for the safety of the galaxy." President Carter smiled coldly. "I have a different proposal. Leave our solar system immediately, or face the consequences." Klexmore laughed. "You dare threaten me? My fleet outnumbers your pathetic Earth Defense Force 10-1. "Admiral," President Carter said, "you seem to have mismounted." The transmission ended. Klexmore stared at the blank screen, confused by the human leader's confidence. Then, alarms began blaring throughout his ship. "Admiral," his sensor officer shouted, "we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the solar system. Ships are decloaking all around us." On the main screen, Dozens of human warships materialized from seemingly empty space. They had been hiding behind asteroids, powered down, to avoid detection, waiting for this moment. Captain Jake Martinez commanded one of these hidden ships. The Liberty's Edge hung in space near Jupiter, its new stealth systems keeping it invisible until now. "All stations report ready, Captain," Amy Brooks said from her tactical station. "Rick, how are our new weapon systems?" Jake asked his engineer, Rick. Torres grinned as he checked his displays. "Everything's working perfectly, sir. The aliens have never seen technology like this." Jake opened a channel to the human fleet. "This is Captain Martinez to all ships. Admiral Collins sends his regards. Execute Operation Silent Thunder." The battle for Earth began in an instant. Human ships struck from every direction, using weapons the Coalition had never imagined. The Liberty's Edge fired quantum torpedoes that phased through enemy shields like they weren't there. Other ships launched kinetic rounds that hit with the force of small asteroids. Admiral Klexmore watched in horror as his flagship's shields collapsed under the human assault. "How is this possible?" he shouted. "Our intelligence said they only had 12 combat ships." His tactical officer was frantically working at his station. "Admiral, I'm counting over 60 human vessels, and their weapons are penetrating our defenses." The Coalition had underestimated humanity in every possible way. For months, human engineers had been working in secret facilities throughout the solar system. They had built new ships using technology the aliens had never seen. More importantly, they had built weapons designed specifically to defeat Coalition defenses. Captain Nina Rodriguez commanded the Earth ship Constitution's Fury. Her mission was to break through the enemy lines and strike at their communication arrays. Her ship was smaller than the Zephyrian cruisers, but it was faster and deadlier. "Target their command ship," she ordered her weapons officer. "Hit them with everything we have." The Constitution's Fury dove through the enemy formation like a shark among fish. Its new armor plating deflected energy blasts that should have destroyed it when Zephyrian ships tried to ram it. The human vessel's revolutionary hull design let it punch through their formations and emerge intact. But the real surprise was waiting deeper in the solar system. Dr. Patricia Lee had spent months building humanity's secret weapon, the Soul Defense Grid. Hidden platforms throughout the solar system suddenly came online, revealing thousands of automated defense systems from her command center on Earth. Dr. Lee watched as her creation activated. "Grid is online," she announced to President Carter. "All platforms responding." The defense grid was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Human platforms emerged from asteroid fields, from behind moons, from the dark spaces between planets. Each one was armed with weapons that could punch holes through the largest enemy ships. Admiral Klexmore realized he had flown his fleet into a trap. "Retreat," he ordered. "All ships retreat to safe distance." But it was too late. The Soul Defense Grid had surrounded his entire armada. Every time a Zephyrian ship tried to escape, automated platforms blocked their path with devastating firepower. Captain Martinez led his squadron in pursuit of fleeing enemy vessels. Amy Brooks tracked multiple targets on her screens, while Rick Torres pushed their engines beyond normal limits. 3 Zephyrian cruisers breaking for the outer system, Amy reported. "Not today," Jake said grimly. "Rick, give me everything the engines can handle." The Liberty's Edge accelerated past the speed of sound, chasing the enemy ships. When they caught up, Jake made a decision that shocked even his own crew. "Ramming speed," he ordered. "Captain." Amy Brooks looked at him with wide eyes. "Our new armor can take it," Jake said confidently. "Theirs can't." The Liberty's Edge slammed into the lead Zephyrian cruiser at incredible speed. The human ship's revolutionary armor plating held together while the alien vessel crumpled like paper. The impact destroyed the enemy ship completely, while the Liberty's Edge emerged from the wreckage, barely damaged. Throughout the solar system, other human ships were doing the same thing. They rammed enemy vessels, fired at point-blank range, and used tactics that no civilized species would consider. The Coalition had called humans too violent for galactic society. Now they were learning what human violence really looked like. On the planet New Texas, Bill Thompson watched the battle through his secret communication device. Zephyrian guards were running around in panic as news of the fleet's defeat reached them. "The humans are fighting back," one guard shouted to another. "Our fleet is being destroyed." Bill smiled for the first time in months. His son Danny was still in detention, but now there was hope. Earth had not abandoned them. Dr. Susan Hayes was treating wounded Coalition soldiers in her clinic. Word of the battle had spread quickly, and the aliens who had seemed so confident just hours ago now looked terrified. "How is this possible?" a wounded Kethtai soldier asked her. "Your species was supposed to be contained." Susan bandaged the alien's injured arm with gentle hands. "You made one mistake," she said quietly. "You thought silencing our voice would make us weak. Instead, it made us angry." Back in space, Admiral Klexmore's flagship was burning. Half his fleet was destroyed, and the other half was trapped by the sole defense grid. He opened a communication channel to President Carter. "President Carter," he said, his voice shaking with fear, "I request terms for surrender." President Carter appeared on his screen again. This time, she was standing in the war room surrounded by her military advisors. Behind her, displays showed the complete destruction of the Zephyrian fleet. "Admiral," she said calmly, "you came here demanding our surrender. Now you're asking for terms? Please," Klexmore begged, "spare my remaining ships. We will withdraw from human space immediately." President Carter considered his request. "You can go, Admiral. But you will carry a message back to Chancellor Vextera and the Coalition Council." "What message?" "Tell them that humanity tried to speak with words of peace. When you silenced our voice, we found a new language. If the Coalition wants to hear more of what we have to say, they can send another fleet. We'll be happy to continue the conversation." Klexmore's remaining ships limped away from Earth, their hulls scarred by human weapons. As they fled, Captain Martinez and his crew watched from the Liberty's edge. "Think they got the message?" Captain Amy Brooks asked. Jake looked at the retreating alien ships. "Oh, they got it? The question is whether the rest of the Coalition is smart enough to listen." Rick Torres was already working on repairs and upgrades. "Sir, I've got ideas for even better weapon systems. If they come back, we'll be ready." The Battle of Earth was over, but everyone knew it was just the beginning. The Coalition would not accept this defeat quietly. Soon, the full might of their galactic empire would come to destroy humanity once and for all. But Earth was no longer the same world that had been silenced 3 months ago. Humanity had spoken in the language of war, and the entire galaxy had heard them roar. The Coalition had awakened something they couldn't control, and now they would face the consequences of their mistake. President Carter stood in her office, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human colonies were still under alien control. Families like Bill Thompson's were still separated. People like Danny were still in detention centers, but now the aliens knew that Earth would fight for its people. The Coalition had tried to silence humanity's voice. Instead, they had taught humans that sometimes actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The Coalition's response came 6 weeks after Admiral Klexmore's humiliating defeat. Chancellor Vextera had assembled the largest military force in galactic history. 12 different species contributed ships to the massive armada that now approached human space. From her command ship, Chancellor Vextera broadcast across the galaxy. Her tall, thin form stood rigid as she spoke to billions of beings on thousands of worlds. "The human species has revealed its true nature," she declared. "They have attacked peaceful Coalition forces and threatened galactic stability. For the safety of all civilized beings, humanity must be pacified permanently. The Armada was terrifying. To be whole, massive Kethtai collective ships moved like floating cities through space. Zephyrian battlecruisers gleamed with weapons that could crack planets. Ships from 10 other species filled the void between stars, all heading toward Earth with one purpose: to end the human threat forever. President Helen Carter stood in Earth's war room, watching the approaching fleet on her displays. Admiral Pete Collins and Defense Secretary Karen White flanked her as they studied the overwhelming force heading their way. Intelligence estimates put their numbers at over 300 ships. Admiral Collins said grimly, "That's 20 times larger than Klexmore's fleet. Can our defenses handle that many?" President Carter asked. Karen White shook her head. The Sol defense grid was designed to stop a normal fleet, not a galactic armada. We'll have to meet them in open space. President Carter authorized Operation Thunderous Silence, humanity's last desperate gamble. Every human ship in the galaxy would converge on Earth for a final battle. They would either win their freedom or die fighting for it. Captain Alex Chen received the orders aboard his ship Freedom's Hammer. His mission was to strike deep behind enemy lines and attack their supply convoys. If the human fleet was going to survive a battle against impossible odds, they needed to cut off enemy reinforcements. "Set course for the Kepler station, Captain," Chen ordered his crew. "If we can destroy their fuel depot, half their fleet will be stranded." The Freedom's Hammer raced through space, dodging Coalition patrol ships as it headed for the enemy's rear areas. Chen's crew worked frantically to avoid detection while maintaining maximum speed. But as they traveled, Captain Chen discovered something unexpected. His communications officer picked up secret transmissions from alien ships. "Captain," the officer said quietly, "you need to hear this. We're intercepting coded messages from Moraxian vessels in the Coalition fleet." Chen listened to the translated messages with growing amazement. The Moraxians were secretly providing intelligence to the human fleet. They were sharing Coalition battle plans, ship positions, and tactical weaknesses. Why would they help us? Chen wondered aloud. His question was answered when a Moraxian captain named Zilith contacted them directly on a secured channel. The alien's face appeared on their screen, his purple skin marked with the scars of many battles. Captain Chen Zilith said, "My people have heard your President Carter's words about freedom and self-determination. These ideas have spread among our crews. We no longer wish to serve the Coalition's tyranny." Chen stared at the alien captain. "You're risking everything to help us?" "The Coalition has ruled through fear for too long," Zilith replied. "Your species has shown that it's possible to fight back. Many of us want to join that fight." Similar conversations were happening throughout the galaxy. The aquatic Neptunians had begun withdrawing their ships from the Coalition fleet. Some Zephyrian captains were refusing orders as their crews heard President Carter's message about individual liberty and freedom. The Coalition armada was falling apart before the battle even began. Chancellor Vexthera watched in fury as ship after ship abandoned the fleet or switched sides. "How are the humans doing this?" she demanded of her advisors. "How are they turning our own people against us?" Her intelligence chief, a nervous Kethtai named Velthak, brought disturbing news. "Chancellor, Dr. Patricia Lee has developed a quantum communication system. She's broadcasting human ideals directly to every planet in Coalition space. Billions of beings are hearing about democracy and freedom for the first time." Vex realized that humanity's real weapon wasn't their ships or their guns. It was their ideas. The concept of freedom was spreading like wildfire through the galaxy, and she couldn't stop it. In the Centauri system, Admiral Pete Collins prepared for the final battle. The human fleet was smaller than ever, but it was supported by rebel ships from a dozen different species. Moraxians, Neptunians, and even some Zephyrians had joined the fight for freedom. Captain Jake Martinez commanded the Liberty's Edge, as part of Admiral Collins's battle group. His crew had been through countless fights together, and they were ready for one more. All ships report ready for battle, Amy Brooks announced from her tactical station. Rick Torres worked frantically at his engineering station, making final adjustments to their weapons systems. Captain, I've got one more surprise for the enemy. If we can get close enough to their command ship, I can overload our reactor and take them with us. Jake looked at his loyal engineer. Rick, that would be a suicide mission. Maybe, Rick grinned. But if it saves Earth, it's worth it. The battle began when Chancellor Vexthera's remaining loyal ships entered the Centauri system. She commanded the attack from her massive flagship, determined to crush the human rebellion once and for all. All ships attack, she ordered. Destroy every human vessel. Show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the coalition. The space around Centauri erupted into the largest battle in galactic history. Human ships darted between massive alien cruisers, using their speed and agility to strike at weak points. The rebel ships fought alongside them, their crews finally free to fight for what they believed in. Captain Nina Rodriguez took the Constitution's fury straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Her ship's revolutionary armor held together as energy blasts from a dozen sources struck her hull. Target their command systems, she ordered her weapons officer. Take out their ability to coordinate. But the coalition still had superior numbers. For every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. The human fleet was being slowly overwhelmed despite their courage and superior technology. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Brooks, Amy's younger brother, piloted a destroyer that had taken critical damage. His ship was losing power, and his crew was trapped in the engineering section. Kevin, Admiral Collins called over the radio, "Get your people out of there. That ship is finished." Kevin looked at his screens and saw Chancellor Vexthera's flagship approaching. The massive vessel was heading straight for Earth, intending to bombard the planet into submission. "Negative, Admiral," Kevin replied calmly. "I've got one more job to do." He aimed his crippled destroyer directly at the enemy flagship and pushed his damaged engines to maximum power. The ship accelerated on a collision course, its hull glowing red from the heat. "For Earth," Kevin shouted as his destroyer slammed into the coalition flagship's reactor core. The explosion lit up space like a new star. Chancellor Vexthera's ship was completely destroyed, taking her and her command staff with it. The death of their leaders sent shockwaves through the remaining coalition forces. Captain Martinez led his squadron through the debris field created by Kevin's sacrifice. The Liberty's Edge emerged from the explosion to find the enemy fleet in chaos. "Amy," Jake said quietly, "I'm sorry about your brother." Amy Brooks wiped tears from her eyes but kept working at her station. "He died free," she said. "That's what matters." At that moment, Dr. Patricia Lee activated her master weapon from Earth. The quantum communication pulse she had developed suddenly broadcast President Carter's message to every ship in the battle simultaneously. For the first time in galactic history, oppressed beings across the coalition heard words of freedom and hope. The message reached not just the crews fighting in space, but their families on distant worlds. The coalition fleet dissolved into complete chaos. Species that had been forced to serve the Council for centuries suddenly remembered what it meant to choose their own destiny. Ships that had been enemies moments before were now joining the human cause. Chancellor Vexthera was dead. Her fleet was scattered. The coalition's iron grip on the galaxy was finally broken. But the battle wasn't over yet. The most fanatical coalition ships, those still loyal to the old system, gathered for one final desperate attack. They would either destroy Earth or die trying. Captain Martinez prepared his ship for the last phase of the fight. "All stations, prepare for final assault. We've come too far to lose now." The Liberty's Edge and its allies moved forward to face the remaining enemy ships. The fate of freedom in the galaxy would be decided in the next few minutes. The final battle lasted only 20 minutes, but those minutes changed the galaxy forever. The remaining coalition ships, filled with fanatics who refused to accept defeat, made one last desperate charge toward Earth. Captain Jake Martinez watched them approach on his tactical display. These weren't the organized formations they had fought before. These were the ships of beings who had chosen death over freedom. Captains who would rather destroy everything than lose control. All human and allied vessels. Admiral Collins broadcast across the fleet, "This is our final stand. Everything we've fought for comes down to the next few minutes." The coalition's last ships struck with the fury of the desperate. They rammed human vessels, detonated their own reactors near enemy formations, and fired every weapon they had without concern for their own survival. Captain Ina Rodriguez found herself facing 3 enemy cruisers at once. The Constitution's fury was outgunned and surrounded, but she refused to retreat. "All power to forward weapons," she ordered her crew. "If we're going down, we're taking them with us." Her ship dove straight into the enemy formation, guns blazing. The Constitution's fury destroyed 1 cruiser before taking critical damage. But Rodriguez kept fighting even as her ship began to break apart around her. But the tide of battle was already turning. The Meraxian ships under Captain Zilith had proven their loyalty by fighting harder than anyone expected. Neptunian vessels used their natural understanding of fluid dynamics to outmaneuver enemy ships in ways that defied physics. Most importantly, more coalition ships were switching sides every minute. Dr. Patricia Lee's quantum broadcast continued to spread President Carter's message of freedom across the galaxy. Crews that had served the coalition for decades were suddenly hearing about democracy and individual rights for the first time. Captain Alex Chen's mission behind enemy lines had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The Freedom's hammer had not only destroyed the Kepler fuel depot, but it also rescued hundreds of human prisoners, including young Danny Thompson from New Texas. "Danny," Captain Chen said as the rescued colonists were brought aboard his ship, "your father will be proud. You stood up for what was right, even when it meant going to prison." Danny looked older than his 18 years after months in coalition detention. "Captain, they told us Earth had forgotten about the colonies. They said nobody was coming to save us." "Earth never forgets its people," Chen replied. "We just needed time to find our voice again." The battle's turning point came when the Kethtai collective ships began fragmenting. These massive vessels had been controlled by hive minds, but Dr. Lee's broadcast was reaching individual Kethtai workers inside the ships. For the first time in their species' history, individual Kethtai began to think for themselves instead of following the collective will. One by one, the great hive ships went dark as their crews chose independence over obedience. Some chose to join the human cause. Others simply withdrew from the battle, seeking to discover what it meant to be individuals rather than parts of a collective mind. The remaining coalition forces found themselves completely alone. Ship after ship surrendered or fled as their crews realized they were fighting for a cause that no longer existed. The last coalition vessel to surrender was commanded by Admiral Veltek, the same Kethtai who had served as Chancellor Vextera as intelligence chief. His ship was surrounded by human and allied vessels, with no hope of escape. "This is Admiral Pete Collins," came the transmission from the human flagship, Admiral Felsek. "You are ordered to surrender immediately." Velthak looked around his bridge at his remaining crew. They were all staring at him, waiting for orders that he could no longer give. The coalition was finished. The galaxy had chosen freedom over control. "Admiral Collins," Veltek replied slowly, "I surrender my ship and crew. The coalition fleet no longer exists." With those words, the Galactic War was over. Humanity had not only won their freedom, but had sparked a revolution that freed countless other species from centuries of oppression. President Helen Carter stood in the communications center on Earth. preparing to address the galaxy. For the first time in months, humans could speak freely to anyone who wanted to listen. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, "today we have proven that freedom is not a human idea. It is a universal desire that lives in the heart of every thinking being. The Coalition tried to silence humanity's voice because they feared our ideas about liberty and self-determination." Her words were broadcast to every world in known space. On planets throughout the galaxy, beings who had never heard concepts like democracy and individual rights listened with growing excitement. "We invite all species to join us in building a new galactic community," President Carter continued. "Not one ruled by fear and control, but one based on cooperation and mutual respect. Every species will have a voice. Every world will choose its own path." On the planet New Texas, Bill Thompson stood in his fields with his wife Susan and their son Danny, who had been freed from the Coalition detention center. The Zephyrian occupiers had fled when news of the Coalition's defeat reached them. "Dad," Danny said, as they watched the sunset over their crops, "do you think things will really be different now?" Bill put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Son, humanity spent 200 years trying to speak peacefully in the Coalition assembly. When they silenced our voice, we found a new way to communicate. I think the galaxy heard us loud and clear." Dr. Susan Hayes had converted her clinic back to treating colonists instead of Coalition soldiers. As she worked, she listened to reports from across the galaxy. Species after species was declaring independence from the old Coalition system. "The revolution is spreading faster than we ever imagined," she told her patients. "The Meraxians have established their own democratic council. The Neptunians are holding their first free elections in 3 centuries. Ambassador Lisa Morgan finally left her small apartment on Nexus Prime, but instead of returning to Earth, she stayed to help establish the new Galactic Assembly. This time, it would be based on principles of equality and representation rather than authoritarian control." Her aide, Tony Clark, worked beside her as they drafted the charter for the new government. "Ambassador," he said, "look at this. We're getting requests from over 60 species who want to join the new assembly." Lisa smiled as she read the messages. "Tony, 6 months ago they told us that humans were too dangerous to have a voice in galactic affairs. Now they're asking us to help them build a better system." Captain Jake Martinez returned to Earth aboard the Liberty's Edge. His ship bore the scars of many battles, but his crew was proud of what they had accomplished. They had been part of something bigger than any single victory. Amy Brooks stood beside him on the bridge as Earth grew larger on their screen. "Captain, do you think we'll see peace now?" Jake thought about all the friends they had lost, including Amy's brother Kevin. "Amy, we fought this war so that future generations could solve their problems with words instead of weapons. If we did our job right, there won't need to be another war like this one." Rick Torres was already working on plans to convert their military technology into tools for exploration and construction. "Sir, imagine what we could build if we used our engineering skills to create instead of destroy." The Liberty's Edge entered Earth's atmosphere and landed at the spaceport, where crowds of people waited to welcome the heroes home. But Jake knew the real heroes were the ordinary people who had refused to accept tyranny, who had kept hope alive during the darkest times. The memorial service was held 1 month after the war's end. President Carter read the names of all those who had died fighting for freedom. The list included Captain Nina Rodriguez, Lieutenant Commander Kevin Brooks, and thousands of others who had given their lives so that liberty could speak. "We gather today not to mourn the dead, but to celebrate the living," President Carter said to the assembled crowd. "These heroes died so that their children could grow up free. They sacrificed their voices so that future generations could speak without fear." The ceremony concluded with the dedication of the Freedom Memorial, a monument that would remind future generations of the price of liberty. Carved into its base were the words that had started the revolution. They silenced humanity's voice. So Earth spoke through war. But the most important ceremony took place in the parks of New Geneva, where children from dozens of different species played together under Earth's blue sky. Human children ran alongside young Moraxians, Neptunians, and even individual Kethtai who had chosen to leave their collective and live as free beings. Danny Thompson, now a student at the new Galactic University, watched the children play. Beside him stood his girlfriend, a young Moraxian named Zara, whose parents had fought alongside Captain Chen during the liberation of Kepler Station. "Danny," Zara said, as she watched a human child teaching a young Kethtai how to play soccer. "Do you think they understand how lucky they are?" Danny smiled. "They don't know about the war, and that's exactly the point. They're growing up in a galaxy where freedom is normal, where different species cooperate instead of fighting." The revolution that had begun with humanity's silenced voice had grown into something no one could have imagined. The galaxy was no longer controlled by fear and oppression. Instead, it was guided by the principles of freedom, democracy, and mutual respect that Earth had been willing to fight for. President Carter stood in her office that evening, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among those lights were hundreds of worlds, where beings were learning what it meant to be free. The Coalition had tried to silence humanity's voice because they feared what would happen if everyone could speak. Now the galaxy knew what happened when every voice was heard. Not chaos and violence, as the Coalition had predicted, but cooperation and peace. The universe was finally learning that freedom was not humanity's gift to the galaxy. It was the galaxy's gift to itself, waiting all along for someone brave enough to speak the words that would set it free. The Coalition had made one fatal mistake. They thought that silencing humanity would end the threat to their power. Instead, they had taught the galaxy that when words failed, courage and sacrifice could speak louder than any voice ever could.